Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. We're joined today by Jeff Gothelf. He is, among other things, a co-author of books. He's co-author of Sense and Respond, Lean UX, and Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking. And he's got a new book titled Forever Employable, How to Stop Looking for Work and Let Your Next Job Find You. So again, amongst the different things Jeff does, he recently co-founded a publishing house called Sense and Respond Press, that's for modern transformational business books. So Jeff, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm great, Mark. Nice to see you again, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I want to learn more about your book and your other work, but we generally dive right in. So I guess I'll ask, from your work experiences, what would you consider to be your favorite mistake, Jeff?
Yeah, it's interesting to call it your favorite mistake because I think about it, and it's super cringy. And it's one of those things like you learn from these things, right? Assuming your ego and your business recovers from them, which generally speaking it should. You learn from them, and it's super cringy. But so this was 5 years ago, and it's scarred me so much that I think about it a lot, actually, because 5 years ago is when I took my business out on its own. The previous 4 years, I had built my business inside a services business that I was building with some colleagues. And then when we sold that, the buyer didn't want my little bit of the business. And so I took it out. And I got a new client. It was a traditional American department store, retail store, one of the big ones. And they had asked me to come in and do a 5-day training with their entire product development department. So product design, engineering, everybody in the same place. It was a big engagement. It was a high dollar engagement. And part of it was an upfront discovery phase, sort of kind of classic consulting discovery, where you come in, you do some interviews, you do maybe some retrospectives, you synthesize all your findings, and then you read it back out to the team, not only to kind of give an external perspective on what's going on, but also to help you prepare the training a bit more effectively, right? To address the actual problems on the ground, rather than a hypothetical generic set of problems. And so I did that, and I spent about a month doing the work, and I synthesized the report. And this is kind of it wasn't my first consulting gig. Obviously, I've been consulting for a while. It was the first one on my own. And I was really trying to make a name for myself. And one of the things that I struggle with personally is sugarcoating. I'm not particularly good at that. I've got I'm going to call it like I see it, as they say. And I wrote the report, and I sent it over, and I guess they didn't really read it. So there was a two-parter, right? There was send over the report and then do a call with my project sponsors and their bosses and whoever else would join the conference call as well. And I guess they didn't really read the report prior to the call. I didn't make sure that they had read it. I didn't send a draft in advance, and so I sent it. And then I get on this call, and I start going through the report, and it was fairly brutal. I mean, they were pretty broken. It was a fairly autocratic, heavy engineering, top down kind of shop. We're going to build these things because we think this is the best thing to build, and customers be damned, and forget testing and learning and design. That's all stuff that can get cut out of the backlog. And so I kind of I was like, this is an anti-pattern. This is causing you to have these kinds of challenges with your customers, et cetera. I'm seeing these kind of politics eroding. And at some point, my project sponsor cut the call short. So I'm going through my delivery, and he's like, Jeff, we're going to have to cut the call short. And I said, okay, I didn't really get why at first. And so he cuts the call, and he's like, I'm going to call you right back. And then he called me right back after he gets everybody off the call, and he laid into me it's so visceral. Like, to this day, I can still feel it, like, in my chest. He's like, how could you do that? You're embarrassing all of us in front of our bosses. You're making us look awful, right? It's not that bad. Like, on and on and on. Like, the big boss was on the call. I mean, and he's right. I made them look terrible in front of their bosses. And he fired me on the spot. Like that was it. I didn't come in. I didn't do the training. I didn't deliver the rest of the gig. And I took a severe lashing, verbal lashing for that. And I guess it's my favorite mistake because I've never made that mistake again. I've done that work multiple times since then, but I've learned how to have the conversation in a more constructive way, I suppose is the best way to put it.
Well, yeah, and I'm sorry, gosh, I feel like I need to buy you a drink or something after, kind of dredging some of this up. Because the intent and the goal of the podcast is, to reflect on mistakes that we've learned from. And it sounds, I applaud you for sharing the story. And then secondly, it sounds like, to the point of never making that mistake again, learning from it. Can you go into a little bit more detail of maybe, some of the approaches you've taken to be a little bit more constructive, or to think about the context of, there's the report and there are facts and observations, and then the setting in which things are delivered, and internal politics being what it is.
Yeah. So look, there's a lot about language. So first of all, especially, verbal, obviously, but also in written communications, there's a lot about language, right? So it sounds ridiculous and a little cliche, maybe cheesy, right? But like instead of sort of challenges in the organization, it's opportunities in the organization. That sounds, you could smile and you could laugh at that and kind of wink, wink, kind of add it. But that's what it is. It's an opportunity for improvement, right? As opposed to a challenge. Here's some opportunities that we've seen where things could be a little bit better. I think that aggregating information as much as possible so that there can't be any specific finger pointing saying, oh, it was that guy who said it, or she talked about me, right? So that goes a long way. I think when presenting this, I've gotten much better at it now, thankfully, over the years. It's more about kind of here's what we're seeing, right? And instead, from our perspective, we're seeing people do this. Is that what you're seeing, right? How is that working for you, right? From our perspective, here's what we're seeing. So there's a lot of sort of confirming those observations first, so you're not, shocking anybody with a new revelation they may not have heard about. And I think that ultimately, when they come back to you with any kind of feedback, you can say, well, look, what I'm hearing you say, right, which is always a very, very popular phrase these days, but what I'm hearing you say is this. And then the other day, what I heard you say was this. And so can you help me reconcile those two things? Because as opposed to, that's not what you said Friday, right? And so that's, and so again, it's really about conversation, mellowing it out, and I think really truly being sensitive to the audience, right? So if it's you and the sponsor one-on-one in a room, you could probably be a bit more frank, right? If it's you and the sponsor and their team, you're not going to make them look like an idiot in front of their team, right? You're going to get fired, and certainly not in front of their boss either. So it's about reading the room, and I've learned how to do that now.
Yeah. Well, and again, the learning is key, as opposed to stumbling through the same mistakes. Or, in an alternate universe, or a different consultant might have come out of that experience saying, well, that client was terrible. Those people were immature, they were irrational, or pointing all sorts of fingers, and instead of stepping back and thinking about what you could do differently. You had mentioned earlier you didn't share a draft. Is that something along the lines of, when I think of Agile or Lean Startup, I think of iteration and I think of tests. Is sharing a draft something that's more standard practice for you now?
It is absolutely. There's, hey, listen, here's what I'm seeing. Take a look, right? Before we distribute this more broadly, what do you think? And really like starting to get some of that early feedback up front, and understanding how directly from the client how to better position this so that it's more receptive. Look, you could argue that, well, Jeff, you're not telling the truth, or you're dumbing down the content, or you're minimizing the impact that you might have on the organization. And initially that kind of felt like that, but I think in hindsight, what I'm actually doing is I'm making my argument in a way where I stand a much better chance of actually it being heard.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's a fair point. And, in recent years, in fact, I met a social worker who was at Lean Startup Week a couple of years ago. And even though I'm doing improvement work in healthcare, and she was starting up a nonprofit using Lean Startup methods, we were talking, and, she said, I think you'd be interested in learning about an approach called motivational interviewing, which has its roots in counseling, which is her world as a social worker. But one of the key takeaways from me as an engineer and thinking about having the right answer versus being effective. Like what really is your goal? Is it to be right, or is it to help somebody change? And so whether, and there are lessons that therapists have had to learn. And I think, myself as a consultant, I don't think that's dumbing it down, but thinking about effectiveness. If you get kicked out and that ends the conversation, that probably wasn't good for that client, right?
No, that was bad for everybody in that situation.
Yeah, but one other thing that you reminded me of when I think of being around hospitals, in the language that's used. I've been in training sessions where nurses or people lower in the hierarchy are taught. They're not just lectured. You should speak up to a doctor or a surgeon. Using language like "I have a concern" can be really helpful, because that's a fact-based statement, and you could learn then from discussion that the concern is unfounded, or there actually is basis for the concern. Or the other one that comes up a lot is, well, help me understand. Like if you disagree with somebody, help me understand why you think, or see, then the word why gets loaded. So maybe there are words that trigger people, and I guess that's a good thing to reflect on. But so kind of moving beyond, the story and the consulting that you do, Jeff, I want to talk about your new book, Forever Employable. Again, the subtitle, How to Stop Looking for Work and Let Your Next Job Find You. What was some of the origin story of the book? Was it based off of job search mistakes for yourself, or that you saw from others, or what led to the book?
So the book came from a series of ongoing inbound requests over the last 5 years of people asking me how I built my business, how I get speaking gigs, how I got a book deal, that type of thing. And, after a while, right, this is a signal from the market, right? There's an inbound, unsolicited flow of requests saying, we'd like to know this story. And I was thinking about it for a long time, and it's kind of an item in my backlog for a long time. And I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to share it. Was it going to be a Medium piece or a blog post or something? And then I decided to write a book about it, because I really felt like there was an opportunity to not only share the story, but anything that I ever write or produce is always practical and tactical, and you can use it immediately after you read the book and apply the things in there. And so I wanted to really help folks reduce their stress and reduce their anxiety when it comes to career growth and development, job seeking, job hunting, professional development, that type of thing. There is a target reader persona in my mind of, essentially, it's well, to be perfectly honest, it's my best friend. My best friend is the same age as me, 25-year veteran of IT, right? He's been climbing the corporate ladder. Sort of every move was like a little bit more money, a little bit more responsibility, a few more people to manage, kind of doing the things that we've been told to do. But every time that there's a merger, an acquisition, a layoff, a market crisis, a pandemic, you name it, he panics. It's, crap, I got to get my resume together. I got to start applying for jobs. And for me, I don't feel that panic. And I haven't felt that panic in at least 8 years at this point in my life. And so one of the things that I wanted to help him and the readers with was to help them understand how to create a situation where you're leveraging your expertise and your experience and your reputation to build a safety net around yourself. And that safety net is a platform of thought leadership that's designed to work like a magnet, and a magnet that pulls opportunities towards you. Now, some of those opportunities are going to be new jobs or gigs, but some of those are going to be speaking gigs, book deals, writing gigs, podcast guests, whatever it is. But all of that is designed to kind of grow your presence so that you don't have to explicitly push yourself out into the market on a regular basis, but instead you've created this pull system that's continuously attracting things towards you.
And so that reminds me a little bit of companies like HubSpot or more broadly, like an inbound marketing methodology that a lot of companies use. Instead of pushing your company, you grow your presence, as you put it, and that can be through blog posts and newsletters and podcasts and free content that establishes thought leadership or something approaching that, whatever that phrase thought leadership means. Does that seem like a reasonable parallel to draw? Or
absolutely. I mean, look, there are a lot of phrases. Yes, there's a lot of phrases around this, and so thought leadership is one. Personal branding is the other. Dory Clark calls it recognized expertise. I mean, it's basically the same thing, right? You're saying, look, here's what I know, here's what I'm good at, here's how I can help you, and I'm proactive. Not only that, I'm helping you right now. I'm proactively sharing my expertise with you through whatever channels I believe will reach you the most in the most effective way, so that when you need this, I'm top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of a lot of people, stereotyping, but with technology backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, like myself included, will say like, we don't want to be salesy, and like I've found personally, the comfort level of saying, well, I want to share information with you, and if that builds a relationship, and then at some point you want to work with me, that feels more comfortable, or maybe I should just find somebody to do more outbound type sales. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times it's more comfortable to say I've got knowledge or ideas that I want to share, as opposed to quote unquote selling in a more explicit way.
No, listen, I mean, in many ways, I mean, this is, and look, I hate selling. Like I hate this. I hate being on sales calls, not because I don't like talking to people. I don't enjoy the chase and the negotiation aspect of it. And I think a lot of people feel that way. This is exactly that. This kind of reverses that. And instead of you having to go out there and be like, hey, Mark, I got this great thing. You want to buy it? Right. And so you're saying, hey, Mark, here's what I learned at work last week. Here's what I learned at work this week. Right. Here's something that I tried and kind of didn't work out, but I learned something from it. And so I'm going to try something different next week. And then next, Mark's like, hey, I need somebody who knows something about, lean startup. And be like, oh, that guy, Jeff, he keeps sharing about that stuff. I'm going to reach out to him, see if he knows anybody. Right. And so all of a sudden, you're not doing any of that proactive selling. The leads do come in, and it does absolutely work. And look, again, I'm certainly not unique in this, and I'm certainly not the most successful at this. But nevertheless, the folks who have, particularly now in the kind of this pandemic reality that we're living in, the folks who are thriving, the folks who are not panicking, are the ones who have built this platform, because they're continuing to drive in these inbound opportunities.
Yeah. And sometimes those inbound opportunities, in my experience, someone will reach out and say something to the effect of like, well, you're probably really busy right now, but somebody who could help with such and such. And if circumstances are such where I say, well, actually, I've got some capacity, maybe, I could help you with this. That has led to an opportunity. And there's something to be said to be a helpful resource when it's not a good fit or when you don't have the time, because that builds and strengthens that relationship for the future.
Absolutely. I mean, look, one of the things that I've done that's been one of the more, in fact, one of the most successful things that I've created in the last 5 years since I've been officially self-employed, is a community of like-employed individuals like myself. So typically they're solopreneurs, consultants, coaches, trainers, speakers, authors, that type of thing, who are in either exactly in my area or in adjacent markets. And all of us learn from each other, build off of each other, refer work to each other, and those relationships grow and thrive from there, to the point where that has become one of the most valuable assets in my professional life, but also in my personal life too, because I consider these folks my friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So one other thing I want to touch on before we end is, going back to work that you've done. Like I've seen you speak at, Lean Startup Week, and you've done work, with Agile and other related methodologies related to startups, entrepreneurship. And, as you said on your website, too much money too much time is wasted on ideas that don't work. So that evaluation at some point of like, well, that didn't work, that product, that business, we could call that a mistake. But I'm curious from your experience, what do you see that's helpful in kind of striking the balance of saying, well, we learn from mistakes. We might want to mitigate the risk. As if we want to completely eliminate mistakes, we would never try. So like, where do you see entrepreneurs finding a balance that's helpful?
To me, the magic ingredient, if there is one magic ingredient to make this mindset shift stick, it's humility. And entrepreneurs aren't exactly known for having tons of humility. I think those that do are the ones that ultimately succeed. Now, I want to be clear about what humility is, right? Humility is not the abdication of vision. And it's not the abdication of leadership either, right? So if you're a manager or an executive, right, it doesn't mean that you're giving all that up. Humility simply means that while you may have strong opinions based on your experience and your expertise, you're willing to change your mind in the face of evidence. That's it. That's all there is to it. So look, I have a lot of expertise in particular fields. I go out there, I try something, and if it fails miserably, I will admit that it failed, and I will learn why it failed, and I will try something different the next time. That's the missing ingredient for a lot of these folks, is to make this stick, is to be able to say, I was wrong. And I learned something, and we'll do it differently the next time. And I think that's the key. That's the key. And I think people are scared of the word, because I do believe that people don't really know what it means. I think they believe that it means that they become sort of subservient, or consensus driven, right? And again, I don't believe that that's true. I just believe that you're simply admitting that if the market refutes your idea, you're willing to admit it. That's it.
Well, and to me, one of the things that makes the lean startup lean, or it puts the lean in lean startup, is this notion of humility. There's a great book that I love on the shelf behind me called Toyota by Toyota. It's a series of essays written by different Toyota North America leaders. And in the very first chapter, and boy, they emphasize this a lot in mentors I've worked with, leading with humility. Or there's an expression, it's often attributed to Gary Convis, who's an American who shifted from the Detroit automakers to Toyota. You would say, lead as if you have no authority. It doesn't. So to your point, you're not abdicating decision-making responsibility, but we're relying less on autocratic hierarchy. As a leader, as we're going through and learning and framing experiments, which again, to me is very Toyota-like, even though that's a manufacturing setting, shifting from being so anchored in what I know versus what we're going to go discover or what we're going to test, I think is a really powerful mindset shift.
And look, and what you're doing in that sense as a leader is you're modeling the behavior so that the people who work with you and for you see that it's okay to behave that way as well. And so all of a sudden, that humility drives learning, right? And so all of a sudden, the capacity, the psychological safety for learning starts to cascade down through the organization as well. And so there's so much value in this, and it's still such a missing quality in a lot of the folks that or the organizations that I work with. So I'd love to see more of it.
Sure. And it's kind of final thought I'll throw at you is, it's an interesting combination of like having enough ego to go and take the risk of starting something, but yet having enough humility to learn from what you're doing. That's a unique combination.
For sure. It's tough. It's a tough balance, but and look, we all love our ideas, right? I think my ideas are awesome. I think all of them are awesome, right? But if they don't work, at some point you have to let them go.
Sure. Well, again, our guest today has been Jeff Gothelf. His most recent book, again, is Forever Employable: How to Stop Looking for Work and Let Your Next Job Find You. So it's available all the places you would find books. And Jeff, tell the listeners your website where they can learn more about the book and you and your work.
Absolutely. JeffGothelf.com. So easy to find. Gothelf.co will take you there as well. Everything's there: books, videos, articles, resources, links to everything. And please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to see you there as well.
Okay, well, great. And I'll make sure that link is in the show notes, jeffgothelf.com. Jeff, really good talking to you. And thanks for being a guest, sharing your story, sharing your reflections. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks so much.